Garden Mania.
BBC Newcastle, radio for the North East.
And a very good morning to you all. Happy New Year. Hello and welcome to Garden Mania, the gardener's phone in on BBC Newcastle with me, Marianne Foster, and our gardening expert from Northumberland College, John Guy. We're here to help you with your gardening problems, whatever the size of your plot, allotment, backyard, or perhaps you've just got a windowsill. Today we'll be meeting a rather special teacher from Corbridge, a United Nations ambassador for teaching sustainability. Dr. Meryl Batchelder is a science teacher at Corbridge Middle School. Now, I met her last month when her school gardening groups took part in the RHS Green Planet Awards and won the award for the most innovative garden design. It was called the Genome Garden. And then, of course, I know you're also a United Nations Climate Change Ambassador, which is slightly different from gardening, but it continues that theme of sustainability, doesn't it, and being aware of what's going on in the world.
My official title is I'm a UN accredited climate change teacher, and this is a course that's put out by an organisation called Educate Global in collaboration with the UN CC Learn organisation. And to become a teacher, it was a course that you do online. It took about I'd say about 20 hours of learning about different aspects of climate change and how it relates to cities, health, children, how children are actually disadvantaged significantly by climate change, and how it relates to inequalities. Now, the course, it was, and then you do a little test at the end of each unit. And what happened is that after I became accredited, I love Twitter. Please don't follow me on Twitter because I tweet all the time. But I started having communications with other climate change accredited teachers, and I spoke to Jamie Driscoll, who's the mayor of North of Tyne, and he's decided to roll this programme out to all schools in the North East, which is amazing.
It is excellent. And I know that there are now about 30 of you in the North East
and
who have gone for this.
And growing.
It's fascinating talking to you, Meryl. Thanks very much indeed for coming in and telling us all about the school at Corbridge and about your work. That was Dr. Meryl Batchelder there. And by the way, a couple of websites, I think, Meryl, correct me if I'm wrong, but one is allthews.educateglobal.org, and that's a sort of teaching online. And the other one is allthews.teachsdgs.org.
The Educate Global has got two C's in it, so it's EDUCCATE global.org.
Yes. We were chatting to Dr. Meryl Batchelder, who's the science teacher at Corbridge Middle School, a school that is a very successful gardening school. As I was saying, it's an RHS 5-star gardening school, which is the highest level. And let's talk a little bit more about it, Meryl. The highest level that you can reach as a gardening school, isn't it, with the RHS?
It is, and I've really enjoyed the experience of going through the awards with the pupils. We have a lovely plaque outside in the garden now, and it just reminds the pupils that actually there is a lot of support out there. We have volunteers that come in now as well, because I think as your reputation grows, and we have a 2 or 3 volunteers who come in and help us. And I'd have to say, if any school doesn't do gardening yet, and they should really try it. But if you're out there and you're thinking, oh, what am I going to do? I've just retired, and I quite enjoy gardening, and there's a school locally, I would really encourage people to go out there and approach their local school and say, is there something I can do? And even if they don't have a green area, you can do pots, you can do growing potatoes in bags. And the RHS actually, can give you some support with that as well. So, the RHS Schools campaign is a fantastically successful, programme.
Next Sunday, we're going to be here. A representative of the RHS is coming in, sitting where you're sitting at the moment. And Christine will be telling us all about how the RHS can help different individuals and groups, and schools with their gardens, because there is all sorts of help available. But let's talk a little bit more about this business of you being a United Nations ambassador for Sustainable Development Goals and also a climate change ambassador. Let's start off with the one that you started off with first, wasn't it? This Sustainable Development Goals. What's that all about?
So when I started teaching 10 years ago, I realised that there wasn't an awful lot of environmental education, and I'm an environmental scientist. My PhD's in environmental geology. And I thought that the pupils were really missing out on that connection with nature and understanding. We're meant to teach about habitats, and you can teach about the Arctic habitat and the polar bears, but if you're not teaching about the problems that they're going to be experiencing over the next years and decades, then you're not preparing the pupils well enough. So I started looking around for something to support my teaching. And in 2016, I stumbled across the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, there's 17 goals. They were released in 2015, and it's effectively a program that's designed to try and be achieved by 2030. So we've got another 10 years now. It's been going for 5 years already. And the goals are... They span all aspects of life on Earth, and effectively are related to trying to make sure that life is sustainable. We know we've got some really big issues. So the first goal is SDG 1, which is no poverty. There's an awful lot of people in the world who still struggle to put shoes on their feet, and food on their plates, and it's there's an awful lot of wealth in the world as well. If we're looking at some of the data that's just come out over the Christmas period, something like the top 500 people have increased their wealth by 25%. By $1 trillion, but we still have people who are unable to put a roof over their heads. So I think that no poverty is really important. And the second one is one of my favourites. It's zero hunger. People should be able to feed themselves. And this, when I was one of the finalists for the RHS Garden Champion of the Year last year, I put a video together of how the goals relate to school gardening, because almost every single one of these 17 goals relates to gardening. If you can grow your own food, then you won't go hungry. So I have a little allotment at home, and I'd say my husband and I grow about half our own fruit and veg. I've had no garden training. I'm sitting here very scared of John because he's talking.
He's sitting here listening to.
He's talking about
hanging on every word.
Cherry laurels, and I'm like, I hope no one asks me about plants. But I do know what a potato is, and I do know what garlic is and onions are, and so I can we grow those, and we're really quite successful. So I think that. And then the goals carry on. The number 3 is health and well-being, and fresh fruit and vegetables are obviously part of that as well. So
do you teach the children in your gardening groups about these different goals, because they all sound sort of very sort of welcome and good principles, but in the end you've got to bring this down to soil level, haven't you, and get the children to understand all this.
So the way I do the SDGs in school is actually I've linked not only the garden but also all of my science curriculum to the Sustainable Development Goals. So as a Teach SDG ambassador, I'm expected to try and promote the goals with young people and then promote them to the wider world. So this is a fantastic opportunity just to talk about them, and I'd recommend any teacher to look at those, because it makes teaching engaging and relevant, and you can apply it to any aspect of your teaching, whether it's gardening or whether it's reading.
And could we at our level, those of us who aren't attached to schools or education in any way, is there something that people could keep in their minds when they're doing their own gardening?
Absolutely. I think, there's one of my favourites is SDG 15, which is all about life on land, and that encouraging biodiversity, the bugs and the birds, and welcoming animals. I'm really concerned about hedgehogs at the moment. Anything you can do to plant hedges and make your land attractive to animals such as hedgehogs would be fantastic.
Which, John, I see you nodding there. I mean, this is the sort of theme that runs through our garden or through our Garden Mania programme all the time.
It does. Every week we're sort of picking these little sort of gems up that to encourage people to do that, and not to keep their gardens too clean, to think about that sort of wider world that lives in and around the garden. And it is so important to the way we live our lives, and more importantly, as we go forward with more urbanisation, that we cherish the green spaces, because it's been proven that our green spaces, our gardens, are so important for wildlife.
Yeah. Dr. Meryl Batchelder is a science teacher at Corbridge Middle School. Now, I met her last month when her school gardening groups took part in the RHS Green Planet Awards, and actually won the award for the most innovative garden design. It was called the Genome Garden.
We call ourselves the genomes as a reference to genetics, and you spell gnomes with G, and green, like, because we're trying to make a garden, I guess, and garden gnomes, sort of.
What have you put in your garden?
Well, there's an allotment which supplies the Jolly Gnome Cafe and the wildlife area. It's like bug hotels, and the geodesic dome, which we call the Gnome Dome, has got palm trees in and it's exotic.
Wow. Do you grow palm trees in Corbridge?
No, but it might be possible if we have our geodesic dome heated up, and it keeps heat in like a greenhouse, so it sustains, like it keeps tropical plants in. We did many lunchtimes in our school to make it.
You've worked hard, haven't you?
Yeah.
But I like the fact that you've now got a sort of a tropical garden in Corbridge.
We use the palm trees because they collect most carbon because they have wide leaf span, which helps them photosynthesize.
So is it something that you've really enjoyed doing?
Yeah.
There we are. Pupils from Corbridge Middle School. Their teacher, Dr. Batchelder herself, has a number of awards to her name. She's a United Nations SDG ambassador, specialising in teaching the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and is now also one of England's very first United Nations climate change ambassadors. Well, last year, Meryl was also recognised by the RHS as a National School Gardening Champion finalist. Meryl, congratulations. Sounds as if you've had a busy year in the last year.
It all sounds very glamorous, but believe me, I'm really just a school teacher.
Tell us a little bit more, just first of all, about Corbridge Middle School, because we heard some of the pupils there, and because I'll ask you in a moment about all this ambassador business. But just how important is gardening, and how is in the school, and how is it involved?
So we have a garden enrichment project on a Friday afternoon. All of the year 7s and 8s, we're a middle school, so we just go for year 5, 6, 7 and 8. But all the year 7s and 8s do an enrichment project. And on rota, they'll do a 6 weeks garden slot on a Friday afternoon. So all the pupils get an experience of working in the garden at different times of year. And it's only an hour and a half or 2 hours outside, all weathers. We have an allotment area. We have a orchard, a wildlife garden, and a polytunnel now. So we've got a lot of areas to look after. But the pupils, the feedback we receive from the pupils is it's quite often the very favourite enrichment project. And I think that's just time outside, working with your friends, being physically active, and actually the magic of seeing things grow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, because you find that, don't you? You were telling me about, the children's reaction sometimes when they pull various vegetables out of the ground.
My favourite little experience of the kids in the garden, we'd just recently got the polytunnel up, and we'd planted some radish seeds, and the pupils planted the seeds and tended to them, watered them. And the time came, it was a few weeks later, this was last summer, early last summer, and the pupils, I said, oh, look, the radishes are now, ready to pull up. And they looked at me, and I was like, okay, so asked little Johnny to come along and, said, pull firmly from the leaves. And they pulled up this beautiful, white, crunchy, gorgeous white ping pong radish. And they just went silent. I was like, looked at them, and they were just like, wow, little Johnny just went, wow, it's magic, miss. And I said, it's not magic, it's a radish. And it's that connection to where their food comes from. I think it's very easy to go and shop in the supermarket, but actually to get dirty, to get, to watch potatoes being dug up by pupils is an absolute joy, because it's real, it's real food. And then sometimes they take some food home because it's a Friday afternoon, so it's not much use to the kitchens on a Friday afternoon. Sometimes we give it to the school canteen, the kitchens. We did the big soup share with the RHS schools this year, and I think that,
Just explain what that is, the soup share, because not everybody will know it.
So the RHS schools, if you don't do school gardening and you're a teacher, try and think about getting involved in some way, because it's really a magical experience in many other ways than just growing a single radish. The soup share is organised by the RHS schools. They can give you some supporting information and leaflets and things. But the idea is that the kids grow some vegetables in the garden, and then they harvest them, and then they make soup and share it with members of the public. And it can be parents, it can be other classes. But we actually invited 12 residents from the local old people's home into into our school dining hall. The pupils prepared the soup. They grew the vegetables, harvested the vegetables, made the soup with some help from the school canteen manager, and then they served these lovely elderly people, and everybody from the pupils all the way through to these lovely visitors that we had were overjoyed to have that experience.
Mm. I mean, it's fascinating because I know your school is a 5-star, an RHS 5-star gardening school now.
It is. And again, thanks to the RHS schools for supporting us, because you go through the level 1, 2, 3, 4 and then 5 awards, and it's there's a lot of guidance on it. It's about raising funds for your garden, selling things, getting experience with tools, appreciating the wildlife aspect of the garden, like John and you were discussing earlier, getting those bugs, and welcoming those bugs into our garden. So it's about learning those skills. And I think in terms of long-term resilience, thinking about things like climate change, I think growing our own fruit and vegetables locally, reducing air miles, getting kids to understand that actually if you plant something, it's quite likely to grow with a little bit of care.
Excellent. Thanks very much for coming in. You're listening to the Garden Mania programme. You can always give us a call or you can send us a text.
Start your text with BBC and send it to 81.